Welcome to the second in our school report cards for the America's Cup Challengers. Today we're talking about Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli. How did their first weekend go? What were the strong points? What were the weaknesses? Let's pick it up where we left off and get stuck into the details for Luna Rossa. We do Luna Rossa next. We'll save American Magic, 'cause I think American Magic there's a lot to say, so we'll go on to Luna Rossa next. Okay, what would you say their call of the weekend was for them?
Probably keeping the mast in the sky today. I don't really know. This is an interesting one. If I'm honest, I don't really think Luna Rossa sailed that well this weekend, which is, considering they're second, maybe a controversial thing to say, but they went head-to-head against the Americans on day two in conditions that we all expected to favour Luna Rossa, and they won. So, fine. Always good to get the win on the scoreboard, but I think we all expected it. On day one, they raced one race against the Brits, and they lost it.
Yeah.
And then today,
they were gifted a win by American Magic.
Yeah, today they should have lost two races, really. So I'm amazed by Luna Rossa because everything about the package, to I think all of us, looks really good. I think a lot of us are really surprised Luna Rossa aren't doing way better than they are. The sails look good, the foils look pretty good, big but good. They've got a strong team. They seem to get off the line pretty well, but there's just something not quite clicking for me in that team.
Yeah, for me, I think call for the weekend was them to follow Ineos around the right-hand mark in the very first race. And yeah, this didn't win them the race, but it kept them in touch.
It's telling that we think their play of the 3 days is in a race they lost.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the race wins they got, it was hard. The race win against American Magic, they just weren't getting up on the foil. I think there's probably a few moments in that race where you could point to where Luna Rossa was sailing the boat very differently. They were hunting the breeze to try and get up onto the foil. And in fact, some points they were sailing upwind away from the lure marks to get foiling, whereas American Magic were a bit more resorted just to sailing a VMG mode, non-foiling. So you could maybe say some of those calls to really chase the breeze down against American Magic made the difference. And in the end, they were just on the foils more. But the flip side of that is they had foils to get them up foiling early. And I think we could probably go into the positive setup note and say that was a big positive setup. That on the light wind day, they looked really good, didn't they, with the bigger foils?
They also sailed with a bigger jib. On that race, as a more general point, if we're ever going to see Code Zeros in this America's Cup, well, that was the race. And everyone talks about how they're slower on the Code Zero, but the actual foiling times in that race were sub 60%. So if you had foiled round the whole course slowly, you would have still won by absolute miles versus someone who was going fast, then sitting stop for 10 minutes.
But I think positive setup, their foils in the light wind were actually really good, and they were hanging on to the other boats upwind, which isn't really a surprise because they're not really doing much over 30 knots. Negative setup for Luna Rossa, I'd have to say their foils seem to really struggle above 35 knots, and I think that was a difference downwind against Ineos today and against American Magic. They just couldn't seem to really break through that 35 knot barrier.
Yeah, I agree. It's not like they can just hit 35 knots and then sail lower. They just seem to hit a bit of a wall. Yeah.
Okay, what was their best boat manoeuvre of the weekend? Boat manoeuvring. I've got one which I really liked, and that was in the light wind race against American Magic, and they strung together a series, I think it was 3 or 4 jibes in the tightest bit of pressure down the left-hand side of the course, and it was just absolutely beautiful. You know, I kind of always assumed that these boats would be pinging off the boundaries, but they showed that they could really float the boat through the jibes in that light wind, and that was kind of, yeah, that was really nice to watch on the boat handling, stringing those manoeuvres together. You got any good boat manoeuvring from?
Not
Luna Rossa?
really, if I'm honest. Like, I mean, I really think this was a weekend where Luna Rossa and American Magic were a bit subpar. And I don't know if that's just because we're now comparing it to a massively improved Ineos, or if there was just something going on.
Yeah, I think on the kind of like bad boat manoeuvring, what I saw and noticed in the race against Ineos, the first race, the second race of the event, but their first race of the event at the weekend, was they really struggled to get the bearways in. And actually most of the delta between Ineos and Luna Rossa by the end of that race was these poor mark roundings where they just struggled to get the bow down into the groove. And I think if they got those mark roundings better, you know, it would have been, I mean, it was relatively close at the finish anyway, but it would have been seconds in it, and they would have given themselves a much better chance to actually push for that win. But those bearways, and you can see it you can see the wake of the boat, and you can still see Ineos's wake going around the women mark, and then Luna Rossa following them, and you can just see how tighter and how sooner Ineos get on the angle after the mark.
Yeah,
So
Luna
that's a
Rossa,
bit of a negative.
Luna Rossa do consistently seem to do a bit of a touchdown after the bearaway. It wasn't just on that first day; it happened today a bit as well. I look at Luna Rossa a little bit, and it almost looks like they have a boat. They're no standout boat handling things for me, and they're no massive negatives, but I think coupled with the fact that we're seeing a boat struggling above 35 knots, it just all feels a bit easy for me. The boat, it can tack well, it can jibe pretty well, but it's just a bit slow, which I really hate to. I really would like that team to be faster. It looks fast, like everything about it looks like it should be fast, but it just feels like it's all a bit comfortable, and they need to push the envelope more for the top end.
It goes against everything in my soul that Ineos's boat is faster than Luna Rossa, because I mean, I'm British and a bit of a fan of Ineos generally, but I'm not sure that hull looks fantastic, like just visually, just from the aesthetics, whereas Luna Rossa, that hull just looks nice, doesn't it? Right, Luna Rossa, you know, where do they go from here? What's the rest of the America's Cup and the Prada Series looking like for them?
I think Luna Rossa have got to work on two things. I think they've got to work on their communication between the two helmsmen and just allow them to make slightly more consistent decisions. And I think they've got to work on their top end speed.
For me, the biggest and quickest fix for them is to get the tactician communications running. That leeward helmsman needs to be feeding that tactical information a bit quicker, because, you know, the best example of this was the hook that wasn't a hook, and we talked about this, and you know, Ineos's tack was really good and really punchy, and that kind of meant the hook wasn't on. But actually, if Bruni had said to Spittle, look, we're going past the lay line for the pin end, we're going past the starboard lay for the pin, then you knew a hook wasn't on anyway, so they would have never attempted it. But that communication wasn't being passed through. Okay, so I'm just in the editing room here, and I'm kind of aware we're not being super obvious in what we're saying here. So there's two things really. As a helm in a match race, you should be 100% focused on the other boat. You should be making the calls of whether you're going to cross, whether you're going to duck, and the exact kind of position of those boats. Now, here, Bruni's commentary as they approach one another is easy hook, easy hook. Now, obviously, that's wrong, but to give Bruni the benefit of the doubt you know, it was just an excellent tack from Ineos. The problem is that this just isn't something your tactician needs to be telling you at this point. Here, have a listen to what Giles says.
Still not quite on pit lane. Copy. Stand by tack. Crossing. 5 seconds to pit lane. 1, 4 down. And turning. Think he's coming behind. Going forward up. Your wheel is behind.
And what Giles doing by talking about where they are in relation to the course is adding extra information. It's providing extra value to Ben. Whereas Bruni, by just talking about whether the hook's on or not, he's not really saying anything that Spittle shouldn't be analysing himself. And in this situation, where the ley line is to the port hand mark becomes really important, because whilst it's nice to get a hook because you can luff and slow your opponent, if you're below the ley line, the starboard ley line to the port mark, then both boats are going to have to tack onto port anyway to cross the line. So if you get a hook on someone, they're going to be all too happy just to tack out of that luff and cross the line. Added to this, the wind shifted left, so again, if you luff someone, they're going to be more than happy just tack onto port and sail the lifted tack, which is kind of exactly what we see Ineos do to cross the line. So I just think in these crunch situations, the communication is between two helmsmen on Luna Rossa rather than a pure kind of tactician nav and a helmsman. And to be fair, the communication between Bruni and Spittle around the rest of the course is actually pretty good. I like the back and forth between them. But I just think in these crunch moments, the leeward helmsman who's doing flight control and supposedly helping with tactics, they need to be reading more of the course situational positioning to improve the helm's decision making. We're thinking of doing a few more videos on the analysis of standard manoeuvres and how applicable they are to these AC75. So if that's something you'd like to say, then drop us a comment down below and we'll have a think about putting a video together on that.
So I know we don't particularly love the American Magic setup of having their tactician on a grinding pedestal, but Luna Rossa have got a chap, they call him Gilo. So he was Bruni's crew in a Star, and he is grinding on the port side. And I actually think someone like that should probably have the race software in front of them and could be relaying a lot of these positional things back to the guys and painting that picture. So that'll depend a bit on the level that their race software is up to. But I just think they need another head in the game.
They do seem to have a lot of race software issues. Like today in the race against American Magic, they were questioning the race committee before the race, saying they weren't getting it. I've heard them numerous times doing comms checks and they don't think they can hear each other. I don't think they had the boundaries on today, so they had a stupid boundary penalty, a stupidly conservative tack where they were leading American Magic and they just tacked away well before the boundary, whereas they could have waited until they had boundary advantage to tack out.
Yeah, it did feel like they didn't have the boundary information. So they were just working off the lights, weren't they?
Right, that's a wrap for Luna Rossa. Next episode, we're talking about American Magic, and boy, did they have an eventful first weekend. So, yeah, subscribe. That video is coming out next. Going to be some really interesting talking points for them. Take care. See you soon.